These are jazz standards. They're well-known songs that musicians frequently play and people love to hear. You probably know some of them, but there's one jazz standard that is almost impossible to play: giant steps. Compared to some of the other jazz standards, at first glance it actually appears quite simple. The reason it's so difficult to play is because of a very specific idea used by John Coltrane. It's part of the class of 1959, a year in which jazz changed forever following the release of some of the most influential jazz records. These include Time Out by Dave Brubeck, where nearly every song features a unique and experimental time signature. And of course, the best-selling jazz album of all time, Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, a record that pushed back against complexity and explored modal jazz, where the musicians improvised on just a few chords for long, extended periods. John Coltrane actually played saxophone on Kind of Blue, and so when he entered the studio to work on his own record just a few weeks later, he also wanted to record something just as experimental. His idea? The most complex chord progression possible. It certainly sounds complex, almost like just random chords, but it's actually based on a very simple idea found in nearly all Western music that we listen to, from pop to jazz to classical, including giant steps. They all share one thing in common: the music is tonal. Which just means that the notes that make up the music are not random, but they instead share a relationship to each other. This might sound like some complicated music theory, but it's actually something that can be explained with just a piece of string. For example, a string on this guitar. If I play this note, which happens to be an A, you might think that what you're hearing is just the note of A, but actually there are other frequencies within that sound, and we can find them by dividing the string up. If we divide it in half, we get this note, which is A again, but an octave higher, and if we divide it into thirds, we get a new note, which happens to be an E, the same as the open E string. We can keep dividing the string into smaller fractions and we'll find more and more notes. But those two notes, A and E, share the closest relationship. So why don't we find the note E and figure out what's closest to that? So we have an E string, we can divide it into half, find another E, and then in thirds, we get the note of B, the same as the B string. And we can keep going round until 12 notes later, we'll arrive back where we started. We now have the 12 notes that make up Western music, and a representation of how closely related they are. It's no coincidence that if we look at a pleasant-sounding piece of music, it's built around this strong relationship between the notes.
Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter.
This sounds great, but as a chord progression, it's very simple. So the challenge for John Coltrane was, what is the most complex chord progression possible? You might think one possibility would be to compose something almost randomly, which is exactly what John Cage did 8 years earlier with Music of Changes, a piece that was in part randomly generated by tossing a coin. But this music is atonal, which means there is no relationship between the different notes. They are random. We've already established that tonal music is built on notes having a natural relationship to each other. And so John Coltrane's challenge was to find a pattern, like in the verse of Here Comes the Sun, that was far more complex. His inspiration was this, Thesaurus of Scales and Melodic Patterns by Nicholas Slonimsky. This book isn't so much an instruction book or a music theory book, but a geometry book that explores the different ways that the 12 notes can be divided into patterns. There are 12 different notes in the Western scale, and we can divide 12 into 2, 3, 4, and 6. If we divide the 12 notes in half, we get a tritone, which also divides the circle of fifths in half. If we divide the notes into 3 equal parts, we get an augmented chord, and it also creates a pattern on the circle of fifths. If we divide them into 4 parts, we get a diminished 7th chord, which also creates a pattern. 6 parts gives us the whole tone scale, and of course 12 parts is the chromatic scale. Now at this point you might be thinking this is more music theory than you signed up for, but the key idea is that if we study tonal music, we discover geometric patterns on the circle of fifths. Just as the verse in Here Comes the Sun shows a pattern of closely related chords, John Coltrane's idea was to compose a piece of music built on the different geometric patterns that we've just seen. With that in mind, let's listen to the beginning of Giant Steps again. There are only 9 unique chords in Giant Steps, and if we place them on the circle of fifths, we get this simple looking pattern. 3 different key centers based on an augmented triad. The result is that Giant Steps isn't a series of random chords, but actually it just jumps between key centers very quickly, hence the name Giant Steps. There's only one remaining problem. When the musicians sat down to record the track, they found this was almost impossible to play. The first attempt at recording occurred in March 1959 and featured John Coltrane on saxophone, Cedar Walton on piano, Paul Chambers on bass, and Lex Humphreys on drums. It's very common with these jazz recordings that the musicians don't rehearse the music before, they just enter the studio and they're able to sight read. But given the complexity of the song, the musicians did have a chance to rehearse before. But ultimately, Coltrane wasn't happy with these earlier takes. You can hear most of them on YouTube, and interestingly, they don't seem to feature a piano solo. The piano is just accompanying. A couple of months later in May, Coltrane entered the studio again, this time with a new ensemble. Tommy Flanagan on piano, Paul Chambers again on bass, and Art Taylor on drums. But this time he made a couple of changes. Firstly, the musicians weren't given any time to prepare for recording, meaning the first time they saw the music for Giant Steps was that day. And secondly, this recording would feature a piano solo. This solo has become one of the most famous in jazz history, as you can hear Tommy Flanagan, an incredible pianist, struggle his way through the solo, eventually giving up on trying to keep up with the changes and just playing chords. But John Coltrane seemed happy with this recording, and this take made it on the record. His experiment had worked. A simple pattern found in this book led to a chord progression that was nearly impossible to solo over. John Coltrane contributed another revolutionary record to this classic era, and composed a chord progression that musicians would forever spend a lifetime learning how to play.